Hello, Sunday school teachers, preachers, and students. Welcome to SundaySchoolPreacher.com. In this week's lesson, the prophet Micah speaks truth to power. The religious leaders are corrupt. The political leaders are corrupt. The northern kingdom of Israel with its capital of Samaria has already fallen, and Micah knows the same will happen to Jerusalem if the corrupt leaders don't change. Micah's job is to warn the nation of Judah so they can turn from their unjust and wicked ways. The two tribes of the southern kingdom know how the northern kingdom of Israel was brutally defeated, taken into captivity, and many deported to Assyria. Yet their headlong slide into idolatry, corruption, and injustice doesn't seem to persuade them to seek justice and righteousness. Instead, they seek bribes, commit murder, and tell lies. These leaders are corrupt, and they only care about themselves and their friends. Micah preaches a message of doom against all of Judah, and he cries out against the priests, the false prophets, and the rulers of Judah. Money, greed, and power have replaced justice and righteousness, and God will destroy the holy city of Jerusalem if Judah's leadership won't do right by the people they're oppressing. Some key ideas surrounding this week's text include the terms Zion and injustice. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for subscribing to this channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe and make sure you click the like button. Also, I love to hear your thoughts on the lesson in the comments below. If you subscribe to this channel and click the notifications bell, you'll be notified as soon as I upload next week's lesson. Plus, that lets YouTube know that you like this channel and they'll promote it more. If you have Wi-Fi in your church Sunday school classroom, this channel is a good way to teach and discuss this week's lesson. I provide a concise overview of background, context, characters, themes, and topics that gets to the point, saves you time, and enhances your own teaching and study. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. But the only way I know this is helpful is if you subscribe, click the like button, or say so in the comments. And if you want to support this channel, I accept gifts and correspondence. My PayPal address is https://paypal.me/SundaySchoolPreacher or email at sundayschoolpreacher@gmail.com. So with that said, welcome again to SundaySchoolPreacher.com, and let's go to work. As always, we begin with the background for today's text. The book of Micah bears the name of the prophet centered in this book. It's the sixth book of the 12 minor prophets, as we've studied with Amos and Habakkuk. And as we've studied with Amos and Habakkuk, the inscription at the beginning of the book identifies Micah as a prophet of God. According to the New Interpreter Study Bible, Micah's preaching spanned two periods: the last years of the divided monarchy and the first years of the existence of Judah alone. Jerusalem was the capital city of Judah, and now it stands alone as Israel's capital city of Samaria has fallen. The NISB notes that Samaria's northern kingdom, or Israel, officially became one of the provinces of the Assyrian Empire in 722 BCE. The southern kingdom consisted of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, with the northern kingdom containing the remaining tribes. So if Micah was written in 700 BCE, Micah's prophecy of the utter destruction of Jerusalem would occur 113 years later in 587 BCE, when the first Jerusalem temple is destroyed. Micah's job is to warn the nation of Judah so they can turn from their unjust and wicked ways. The 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel have already fallen. The 2 tribes of the southern kingdom know well how the northern kingdom of Israel was brutally defeated, taken into captivity, and many of them deported to Assyria. You can check 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, verses 3 through 6. Micah knows Jerusalem is next, if the political leaders and religious leaders don't turn the nation around. The NISB also notes that this book is a collection of oracles written in a variety of styles and perhaps representing several periods. Many scholars believe the earliest speeches were written by Micah in the 8th century, and the others updated the vocabulary, added lines, and entire speeches in later centuries. But there's little agreement on the details. In my view, what is certain is that this is a powerful account of the injustice in Judah, the righteousness of God, and it is a message for us today. The NISB also lists 3 themes in Micah. These themes are derived from the attention to the proper names of Israel, Jacob, and Micaiah. It notes that Micah generally chooses to refer to the southern kingdom, which is Judah, as Israel. He wants to remind his listeners of the unity of the people as the Lord's covenant partner, even though Israel ceased to exist in 722 BCE. So when you see Israel in the text, in most cases, it specifically refers to Judah, but broadly to the northern kingdom of Israel as well. Micah knows that even though the monarchy of King David was divided, the 10 northern tribes were still a part of the great work God did in the nation's history. The NISB also notes that Micah calls Judah Jacob, referring to Jacob and Israel. Additionally, Micaiah is the full form of Micah's name. His name asks the question, who is like the Lord? Nelson's Bible Handbook notes that Micah exposes the injustice of Judah and that about 1/3 of the book indicts Israel and Judah for specific sins. Another third of the book predicts the judgment that will come, and the remaining third is a message of hope and consolation. God's justice will triumph and the divine deliverer will come. So of the 7 chapters in this book, 1/3 is an indictment that tells them what they're doing wrong. Another third tells them what will happen because of their wrongdoing, and another third offers the hope of God if they turn from injustice. Nelson also explains that Micah begins by launching into a general declaration of the condemnation of Israel, which is Samaria, in its capital city of Samaria, and Judah with its capital city of Jerusalem. Both kingdoms will be overthrown because of their rampant treachery. Some of the specific causes of judgment include premeditated schemes, covetousness, and cruelty. It's this kind of injustice that causes Micah to speak out against the political leaders and the religious leaders of his day. Micah speaks truth to power. He confronts the political and religious leaders of Judah with their injustice. Micah preaches a message of doom against all of Judah, and he cries out against the priests, the false prophets, and the rulers of Judah. That message of doom begins in chapter 1. As the NISB notes, Micah portrays the destruction of Samaria as a theophany or divine appearance. The Lord will walk on the earth, bringing destruction, check verses 3-4, because of the evil of the northern kingdom, Israel. So if you read the first chapter, you'll get the sense of utter destruction and doom by the hand of the Lord. It's an indictment against the religious leaders of Judah. They're guilty of idolatry. The second chapter is an indictment against people who devise wickedness and evil deeds on their beds at night and against corrupt priests and prophets. These are economic injustices, and again, an indictment against the religious leaders. The third chapter is an indictment against the rulers of Judah. These include the prophets, priests, and political leaders. The prophets are corrupt. The priests are corrupt. and the political leaders are corrupt. Money, greed, and power have replaced justice and righteousness. The 6th chapter presents a metaphorical courtroom with God making the case against Judah, telling them what God requires and that cheating and violence will be punished. In all of this, God reminds the Judahites of what God has delivered them from and where God has brought them from. Their wickedness, corruption, and unrighteousness will bring punishment if their unjust and unrighteous ways don't change. Some important terms to consider about this text include Zion and injustice. Now for the review of last week and how it connects to this week. In last week's lesson, the prophet Habakkuk learned that there would be consequences for the injustice of Judah and especially of Babylon. He had taken his watch on the tower wall. He questioned God, and he was expecting an answer from God. He had made his complaint known, and now he would watch and wait to hear an answer from God. God graciously answered the prophet. God told Habakkuk to write and to make it plain, and that's exactly what Habakkuk did. Habakkuk essentially trash-talked the Babylonians when he wrote the prophecy containing the 5 woes that would befall the wicked and evil Babylonians. He wrote the prophecy, and there would be no question about who he was writing about and who would cause the woes to befall the Babylonians. When God said something will come to pass, people would be able to look back at the record and know that it was God who brought it to pass. The wicked and evil Babylonians were on top at the moment, but judgment was coming. And when it did come, it wouldn't be pretty. God would still use the Babylonians to punish Judah. Judah wouldn't escape, but the Babylonians would fall. And when they do fall, it would be epic. This week we continue in the theme of justice and the prophets. This week's prophet is Micah. In this week's text, Micah speaks truth to power. The religious leaders, the prophets, and the priests are corrupt. The political leaders are corrupt, and the people devise wicked ways to cheat people. Justice and righteousness have been replaced with money, greed, and power. Micah's job is to call out the injustice and warn the people of the coming utter destruction if their ways don't change. Townsend and Boyd's commentary titled this week's lesson, Corrupt Leaders. Standard Lesson commentary titles this week's lesson, An Argument Against Corruption. The scripture text comes from Micah, the 3rd chapter, verses 1 through 3, then skips to the 9th through the 12th verses, and then skips again to the 6th chapter, verses 6 through 8. I'll read that text for you now from the New Revised Standard Version. And as I read, I want you to pay attention to how the political leaders hate good and love evil. How the religious leaders judge for a bribe, teach for a price, and the prophets tell fortunes for money. Both the political and religious leaders of the country are corrupt, and righteousness and justice has been replaced with money, greed, and power. We begin with the section entitled Wicked Rulers and Prophets. And I said, Listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel, should you not know justice? You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and the flesh off their bones, who eat the flesh of my people, flay their skin off them, break their bones in pieces, and chop them up like meat in a kettle, like flesh in a cauldron. And then we skip down to the 9th verse, the 9th through the 12th. Hear this, you rulers of the house of Jacob and chiefs of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity, who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with wrong. Its rulers give judgment for a bribe. Its priests teach for a price. Its prophets give oracles for money. Yet they lean upon the Lord and say, Surely the Lord is with us. No harm shall come upon us. Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field, Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height. And then we move to the 6th chapter, verses 6 through 8. We begin with a section entitled, What God Requires. Verse 6. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? What takes place in this passage? The lesson opens in chapter 3, verse 1, with Micah having already indicted both the religious and political leaders of Judah. He's pronounced judgment against Samaria in Israel and Judah, declared the doom of the cities of Judah, and denounced the social injustices of the land. Micah knows what's already happened to the northern tribes of Israel and its capital in Samaria, and he knows what will happen to the southern kingdom of Judah and its capital in Jerusalem if the injustice doesn't stop. Verse 1 begins, And I said, Listen, you heads of Jacob and rulers of the house of Israel. The pulpit commentary notes that these heads of Jacob and rulers addresses the heads of families and the officials to whom the administration of justice is concerned. These are the rulers, the priests, and the prophets. They are the leaders in charge of the political systems and the religious systems in Judah. They are the ones who are supposed to know justice, practice justice, and mete out justice. The pulpit commentary notes that these magistrates and judges seem to have been chiefly members of the royal family in Judah. Of all people, these are the people who should know, understand, and practice justice. They should be concerned with justice, fairness, and righteousness. These people in the royal family are the ones Micah is speaking out against. Micah speaks truth to power. In verses 2 and 3, Micah declares, You who hate the good and love the evil, who tear the skin off my people and flesh off their bones, these rulers are corrupt. Instead of loving justice and righteousness, they hate good and love evil. It should go without saying that people in authority, people who have power, can do so much more damage when they are ruled by evil instead of good. The NISB notes that they are portrayed as cannibals who eat the people they're charged to govern. No wonder the Lord will not respond when they ask for help from the trouble that's coming. In these 3 verses, Micah speaks truth to power. He accuses the rulers of hating good and loving evil, and he portrays the rulers as cannibals who eat their own people. Clearly, Micah has no respect, no regard, and no affection for these corrupt leaders who are only concerned about themselves and their friends. The text then skips to verses 9 through 12. If you read verses 5 through 8, you get the picture of a prophet who cries loud and spares not. In these verses, Micah directly accuses the corrupt prophets. The NISB notes that the prophets tailor their message to the amount that would be food in verse 5 and money in verse 11, to the amount paid to them by their audiences. Verse 9 begins, Hear this, you rulers of the house of Jacob and chiefs of the house of Israel, who abhor justice and pervert all equity. Micah is driving home the point that these rulers are corrupt. They haven't simply replaced justice with greed. They abhor justice and pervert equity. The UBS Handbook on Micah notes that by their attitudes and actions, the rulers were really undermining the whole social structure of the nation and their own position within it. The New American Commentary notes that Jacob and Israel in this verse refers to Judah. In verse 10, the writer continues the same line of thought, saying, "Who build Zion with blood and Jerusalem with wrong?" The Westminster's Dictionary of Theological Terms defines Zion as used in the Old Testament for all or part of Jerusalem. In both Old and New Testaments, it refers to God's heavenly city. Check Isaiah the 60th chapter, verse 14, Hebrews the 12th chapter, verse 22, and Revelation 14:1. In the Christian church, it is an image for heaven. So in this case, Micah is referring specifically to Jerusalem. He declares Zion or Jerusalem is built with blood. The UBS Handbook on Micah notes that the city's moral foundation was one of murder and injustice. The rich could only afford these buildings because they were cruel and oppressive to the poor. The injustice of Micah's time is not unlike the injustice of our time. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer because of corrupt leaders who care only for themselves. Not only did they disregard the poor, they broke their covenant with God. UBS also interprets this verse as you are able to do so much building in the city only because of the murder and injustice by which you gain your money and your power. In verse 11, the political leaders hate good and love evil. The religious leaders judge for a bribe, teach for a price, and the prophets tell fortunes for money. Both the political and religious leaders of the country are corrupt. The political system and the religious system have failed the people. Even with this corruption, they still tell the people, "Isn't the Lord among us?" and reassure the people that no disaster will come upon us. UBS explains, the leaders of the nation, both the secular rulers and the religious priests and prophets, are all corrupt and have more interest in growing rich than in doing their jobs properly. In verse 12, the writer tells us, "Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be plowed as a field. Jerusalem shall become a heap of ruins, and the mountain of the house a wooded height." Micah is laying it bare. The house of God, the temple in Jerusalem, where for centuries the people have gone to worship God, it'll all be destroyed. And it'll be destroyed because of corrupt leaders. UBS notes that the Lord sees through their pretense and will bring judgment upon Jerusalem rather than allow their evil deeds to continue. So God would rather destroy the holy city than to see it used in this way to uphold injustice and oppress the poor. I continue to say that God is more concerned with how we treat people than God is concerned with us following the rules and regulations of the law. The priests were still making sacrifices and conducting religious services, but their hearts were far from God. The text then skips to chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. In chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, the NISB notes that the scene shifts from the judicial to the liturgical. Israel, as worshiper, asks what offering is needed to placate the Lord, proposing increasingly extravagant gifts, ending with child sacrifice. God is not interested in their sacrifices. God is interested in their obedience. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. UBS explains, in verse 7, the offerings suggested gradually increase in size and value until they reach a climax, which is both horrifying and self-defeating. It was quite beyond the ability of the ordinary Israelite to offer 1,000 sheep. Verse 8 is the answer to the question. God is interested in relationship. There's liberty in Christ Jesus, and that liberty frees us from sacrifices. It frees us to come before God just as we are, with our hearts turned toward God, and not pretentious rules and regulations when our hearts are far from God. Well, that's what takes place in the text. Let's give the text some context. In 1936, Dale Carnegie published How to Win Friends and Influence People. That self-help book has been republished many times and in many different languages and formats since then. It's nice to have friends, and especially nice to have friends in high places. But hopefully, those friends aren't corrupt. Micah wasn't trying to win any friends in high places. In fact, he specifically denounced the rulers and leaders of both the political and religious systems. Micah spoke truth to power. He was concerned with righteousness and justice because he knew what was at stake, the very life of his nation. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to suggest that the same applies to us today. Righteousness and justice are the foundations of a safe and secure society. Keywords, not necessarily in the text, but good for discussion. The first would be Zion, which is used in the Old Testament for all or part of Jerusalem. And in this case, Zion speaks to part of Jerusalem. And the second keyword is injustice, which is the ethical wrong of not rendering to another that which is due. It is condemned by the biblical prophets. And you can check Isaiah, the 58th chapter, verse 6, Jeremiah 22, verse 13, and Hosea, the 10th chapter, verse 13. So that's keywords. Let's look at themes, topics, discussion, or sermon preparation ideas. And one might be speak truth to power. Micah wasn't afraid to confront the corruption of the ruling class in his society. He denounced both the corrupt religious leaders and the corrupt political leaders. And the question you might ask your listeners, Micah saw the injustice of both the political and religious systems. What did he do about it? And now for the preview of next week's lesson. Next week's lesson continues in the Old Testament minor prophets. The lesson for March 29th, 2020 comes from Malachi, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 9, and skips to the 3rd chapter, verses 5 and 6. Next week's lesson is titled Leading Justly and Need for Just Leaders. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am Reverend Dexter Alexander, and you've been listening to SundaySchoolPreacher.com. If you want to support this channel, I accept gifts and correspondence. My PayPal address is https://paypal.me/SundaySchoolPreacher, or my email at SundaySchoolPreacher@gmail.com. Again, the only way I know this is helpful is if you subscribe, click the like button, or say so in the comments. Please also click the notifications bell so you'll be notified as soon as I upload next week's lesson. And if you don't mind, please share this site with other Sunday school teachers, preachers, and students. Thank you, and may God bless you real good.